if I could take it all back, every single second of that damned trip, I would. I'd burn the memory from my mind if it meant I could see my brother's face again, hear my girlfriend's laugh. But the guilt is the only thing I have left of them. It's a cold companion, a constant reminder of the rules I broke, of the choice I made that led us all into that frozen hell. I see their faces in my nightmares, and I wake up screaming into a silence that they left behind. It all started with a simple idea, a weekend getaway. Just 4 of us, carving down a mountain, laughing in the face of the cold. How could something so pure turn into a story I can barely tell myself? The drive up was perfect. My brother Liam was buzzing, practically vibrating in the passenger seat. His girlfriend, Chloe, was in the back with my Saren, the 2 of them singing along to some terrible pop song on the radio. We were invincible. Young, in love, with a whole weekend of fresh powder ahead of us. The resort ... It should have been our first warning sign. It was practically a ghost town. The air had a bite to it that felt different, sharper. The guy at the front desk, face like a clenched fist, mentioned a projected blizzard, advising everyone to stay put, but we'd driven for hours. Liam, ever the optimist, just laughed it off. "We'll just get a quick run-in," he'd said, his grin infectious. What's the worst that could happen? I was the older brother. I should have said no. I should have put my foot down. But I saw the excitement in Sarah's eyes, the eagerness in Liam's, and I caved. That one word, okay, has haunted me ever since. The sky was a deceptive, crystal blue when we got on the lift. But halfway down our first run, the world just ... disappeared. It wasn't a gradual thing. It was like a switch was flipped. One moment we were skiing through light flurries, the next we were inside a roaring white void. Visibility dropped to 0. The wind howled, ripping at our clothes, stealing our breath. Panic set in. We were shouting for each other, our voices swallowed by the storm. And then I heard the sickening crack, followed by a scream. It was Chloe. We found her crumpled at the base of a massive pine tree. Her leg bent at an angle that made my stomach lurch. The snow around her was starting to bloom with a dark, terrifying red. We tried to retrace our path, but there was no path. There was only the blizzard, a swirling, endless maze of white. We were lost, trapped on a mountain that was actively trying to kill us. With Chloe's pained sobs as the only compass we had. Panic is a funny thing. It's supposed to be sharp, a jolt of adrenaline to get you moving. But out there, in that deafening white, it was a thick, cold sludge filling my veins. Liam was frantic, trying to splint Chloe's leg with a ski pole and strips torn from his own jacket. Sarah was trying to keep Chloe conscious, her voice a thin, shaking thread against the storm's roar. And me, I was the leader, the big brother. I was supposed to have a plan, but all I could do was stare into the endless white. The crushing weight of my decision pressing down on me until I could barely breathe. We had to move. Staying put was a death sentence. We fashioned a crude drag sled from our skis, a miserable, clumsy thing that barely held together. Getting Chloe onto it was an agonizing process. Every slight jostle, every shift of her broken leg, tore a fresh scream from her lips, a sound that cut through the wind and straight into my soul. Liam and I took turns pulling. It was brutal, soul-crushing work. The wind was a physical force, a wall we had to push against with every step. The snow was deep, and the makeshift sled dug in, catching on buried roots and rocks we couldn't see. My muscles screamed. My lungs burned from sucking in air so cold it felt like swallowing glass. Hours blurred into a meaningless stretch of white and pain. The cold was relentless, seeping through our layers, numbing our fingers and faces. Chloe had stopped screaming and was now ominously quiet, her moans becoming weaker, more spaced out. Sarah, her face a mask of frozen tears, kept checking her pulse, her own movements becoming sluggish. Hope was a dying ember. Every direction looked the same. Every tree was a carbon copy of the last. The mountain had swallowed us whole. There was no up or down, just the endless, agonizing drag through the storm. Liam was running on pure desperation, his earlier optimism replaced with a grim, hollow-eyed determination. I saw him stumble, his body giving out, and I'd grabbed the sled, my own exhaustion a distant roar in my ears. We were just two brothers, dragging what was left of our world through a frozen nightmare, with no end in sight. We were going to die out there. The thought wasn't even frightening anymore. It was just a dull, cold fact. And just as I was ready to let the snow take me, to just lie down and let it be over, a shape emerged from the swirling chaos. A figure, dark and solid against the white. He was dressed in the uniform of a park ranger. His face weathered and calm, a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding us. He didn't seem surprised to find us, just nodded slowly, a flicker of something like pity in his eyes. "Nasty storm," he said, his voice low and steady. "Caught a few of you out, it seems." Relief washed over me so powerfully my knees almost buckled. We weren't going to die. We were saved. He told us his station was close, a place to wait out the blizzard. The journey was a blur of renewed hope. He took the front of the sled without a word, pulling with an easy, rhythmic strength that shamed our desperate efforts. Before long, a dark shape solidified in the swirling snow, a small, rustic cabin with a single plume of smoke rising from its chimney. The warmth inside was the most beautiful thing I'd ever felt. It was a simple, one-room station, smelling of pine and wood smoke. The ranger, who introduced himself as Elias, helped us get Chloe settled near the crackling stove. He gave us thick blankets and hot stew that tasted like life itself. For a few hours, we were almost normal again. We huddled by the fire, playing an old board game we found on a shelf. The blizzard raged outside, but in that small, warm space, it felt a million miles away. But the illusion of safety was fragile, and it was Chloe's leg that shattered it. Despite the warmth of the cabin, the part of her leg below the knee was turning a horrifying waxy white. Then, patches of black began to appear, spreading like ink stains on paper. It looked like frostbite, but it made no sense. She was feet from a roaring fire. Elias examined it, his calm demeanor finally cracking. He said he'd never seen anything like it. That's when Liam broke. He stood up, his eyes wild with terror. "I'm going," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm going to get help. She needs a doctor, not a fireplace." I jumped up and stood in front of the door. "You're not," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "You won't make it 100 yards out there." "I have to try," he screamed, shoving me. "We can't just sit here and watch her die." We grappled, a desperate, clumsy fight fueled by fear and love. He was my little brother, and all I could see was him freezing to death in that white hell, another ghost to haunt me. I was stronger. I pinned him against the wall, his frantic struggles slowly subsiding into ragged sobs. "I won't let you die too," I whispered, my own tears finally breaking free. Elias separated us, his hand on my shoulder. "He's right, son. Nobody's going anywhere tonight." The fight left a cold, ugly silence in the room, a tension far worse than the storm outside. We retreated to our separate corners, the fragile piece of our sanctuary gone, replaced by a thick, choking dread. Little did we know, the real horror hadn't even begun. The silence that followed our fight was a physical presence in the small cabin, heavier and colder than the snow piling up against the walls. Liam had crumpled, sliding down the rough-hewn planks to sit with his face buried in his hands. his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. The air was thick with unspoken fear. Sarah was by the fire, her back to us, pretending to organize the cans on a shelf, anything to create a sense of purpose. I watched her for a moment, then walked over to Liam, the floorboards groaning under my weight. I slid down the wall to sit beside him. "I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling clumsy and small. "I shouldn't have grabbed you." "You were right to be scared." "I am too." He didn't look up. "It's my fault," he whispered, his voice muffled by his hands. "I pushed to go skiing. I told her it would be fine." "It was my call," I countered, my own guilt a bitter taste in my mouth. "I'm the older brother. I should have said no. This is on me, Liam, not you." I put an arm around his trembling shoulders. "But we can't fall apart. We stick together. That's the only way we get through this. Okay." He finally gave a tiny, reluctant nod. It was Sarah who pulled us from the brink. She turned from the shelf, holding a dusty, worn-out board game. "Look," she said, her voice straining for a cheerful note that cracked mid-syllable. "Forbidden Forest. The box says it's for ages 8 and up. I think we just about qualify." It was an absurd suggestion, playing a game while Chloe's life hung in the balance. But the alternative was drowning in our own terror. We needed the distraction. We needed to pretend we were just for friends in a cabin, waiting at a storm. We gathered on the floor, the game board, faded and worn, spread between us. The goal, ironically, was to escape a cursed woods by collecting artifacts. For a little while, it worked. We moved our little plastic pawns, drew cards, and for moments at a time, we were just people playing a game. We argued over the silly rules. And I saw a flicker of the old spark in Liam's eyes when his piece got sent back to the start by a troll card. Even Chloe stirred slightly, her brow furrowed, as if she could hear us in her pained sleep. Elias watched us from his chair, a small, sad smile on his face. "Be careful of the shortcuts in that game," he said quietly, his gaze distant. "They don't always lead where you think." The advice hung in the air, feeling strangely significant. The game was a flimsy shield, but it was a shield nonetheless. It held the terrifying reality at bay. But then, a new sound began to weave itself into the howl of the wind. A low, rhythmic, scraping sound. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, her hand hovering over the dice. "Hear what?" Liam asked, frowning. "It's just the storm," I said, trying to believe it myself. But the sound grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't a branch. It sounded like something heavy, something metallic, being dragged through rock and ice, getting closer and closer. Liam's head snapped up, his eyes wide. Sarah froze, her face pale. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. We all looked at Elias. The ranger's sad smile was gone, replaced by a mask of pure, primal fear. He slowly raised a finger to his lips, his terrified eyes locked on the cabin door. The scraping stopped. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the noise itself. For a long, drawn-out moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire and the storm outside. And then came 3 soft, polite knocks on the door. The 3 knocks echoed in the sudden, suffocating silence of the cabin. They were soft, polite, completely at odds with the raging blizzard outside. A man's voice followed, muffled by the thick wood of the door but clear enough to understand. "Hello? Is anyone in there? I saw your light. My team and I are combing the area for lost skiers. Please, open the door. We need to get you all to safety." Relief hit me like a physical blow. It was help. Real help. He heard us. Liam choked out, scrambling to his feet, He lunged for the door, his hand outstretched to slide the heavy bolt. No, Ilias's voice was a whip crack. He moved with a speed that defied his age, throwing himself between Liam and the door. He slammed his back against it, his arms spread wide as if to ward off a physical attack. "Get away from the door." "What are you doing?" Sarah cried, jumping up. "That's rescue out there. We have to let them in." "That is not rescue," Elias hissed, his face pale and beaded with sweat despite the cabin's warmth. His eyes were wide with a terror so profound it made my blood run cold. "That thing out there, it is not human." We stared at him as if he'd lost his mind. "You're crazy," Liam yelled, trying to push past him. "We're saved, and you're keeping us trapped in here." The voice came again, its tone patient, reasonable. "There's no need to be frightened. I understand you've been through a lot. But I know you have a girl in there with a badly broken leg. I have a full medical kit. I can stabilize it. Just let me in." A cold dread, far deeper and more terrifying than anything I'd felt in the storm, washed over the room. We all froze. Liam's hand dropped from Elias's arm. Sarah took a stumbling step back, her hand flying to her mouth. We all turned to look at Chloe, lying by the fire, then back at the door. How could he possibly know the specific nature of her injury? We hadn't used a radio. We hadn't called for help. No one in the world knew what was wrong with Chloe except the four of us in this room. Elias saw the realization dawn on our faces. He simply nodded, his eyes grim. "It knows," he whispered. "It always knows." "We're not opening the door," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Liam, now as pale as Elias, shook his head and backed away from the door. "Don't open it." For a moment, there was only silence from the other side. The friendly persona was gone. When the voice came again, it had lost all its warmth. A cold, hard edge crept in. "I know you're in there. I can smell your fear. I will not ask again. Open this door." And then the door shuddered as something slammed against it with bone-jarring force. The polite knock was replaced by a furious, violent hammering that shook the entire cabin. The thing outside wasn't asking anymore. It was demanding. Panic erupted. The furious hammering on the door was joined by a sound like claws scraping down the wood. We threw ourselves into action, a single-minded terror driving us. We shoved the heavy wooden table against the door, piling on chairs, our packs, anything with weight. Elias wedged his axe handle under the bolt. The assault continued for what felt like an eternity, a relentless, violent siege against our flimsy sanctuary. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Silence fell again, broken only by our own ragged breathing and the indifferent howl of the storm. We stayed frozen, listening for hours, but the thing did not return. Exhaustion, a heavy, leaden blanket, finally claimed us. One by one, we slumped to the floor, our fear-racked bodies shutting down. I fell into a fractured, dreamless sleep. I awoke to a cold that had nothing to do with the weather. The fire had died to embers, and the cabin was filled with a gray Preden light. Elias was asleep in his chair. But Sarah and Chloe were gone. The barricade was disturbed, a small gap cleared, the door slightly ajar, swinging in the wind. A guttural scream tore from my throat. No. Elias was awake in an instant, but Liam and I were already gone, bursting out into the blinding white chaos of the blizzard. Don't. Elias's warning was swallowed by the wind. We ran, screaming their names, following a single, horrifying trail of disturbed snow. We found them 50 yards from the cabin. What was left of them? I'll spare you the details, but the snow around them was a nightmare canvas of red and white. As we stared in horror, a movement in the trees caught my eye. A tall, gaunt shape, unnaturally thin with limbs too long, was moving with impossible speed through the dense forest. It turned its head, and even from that distance, I felt its ancient, malevolent gaze on me. We turned and ran. We didn't get far before Liam screamed, a sharp, piercing cry of agony. He fell, clutching his leg, a deep, bleeding gash torn into his thigh. The thing had caught him. As I tried to drag him, Elias appeared through the swirling snow. He took one look at Liam, at the blood pouring onto the snow, and his face was set with a terrible finality. "Go," he said, his voice firm. "But he's losing too much blood. He needs warmth now, more than speed. I can give him that." He began stripping off his own thick coat to wrap around Liam. "You run. Get help. It's the only way." He pushed me, his eyes pleading. "Go," I ran. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out, stumbling for what felt like days until I collapsed at the steps of a brightly lit, modern ranger station. They told me I'd been wandering for almost 12 hours. I told them everything. About the cabin, the girls, about Liam. I told them Ranger Elias had saved us. The lead rescuer looked at me, his face grim. "Son," he said gently, "there's no ranger named Elias in this sector. There hasn't been anyone stationed in that old cabin for over 50 years. When the search party finally made it back to the site, they found nothing. The cabin was empty, swept clean by the wind. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, no bodies. No trace that Elias, Liam, Sarah, or Chloe had ever existed at all." In the weeks that followed, they launched the biggest search operation the park had ever seen. For years, teams combed that mountain, but they never found anything. Not a single trace. My story was officially recorded as the product of a traumatized mind. A fiction my brain had invented to cope with the tragic reality of my brother and friends being lost in a blizzard. The old cabin, according to their records, had burned down in the 1950s. I became the boy who cried, monster, my tale, a local ghost story. For years, I lived in a haze, questioning my own sanity. The line between memory and nightmare blurred into nothing. Then, a decade later, a hiker went off-trail, miles from where I had been found. Tangled in the roots of a withered, ancient pine, they found a tattered ski coat, faded by the years. It was Liam's. I knew it the second they showed it to me. The wolf patch he had insisted on sewing onto the sleeve himself when he was a kid was still there. It was the only piece of evidence ever recovered. It didn't bring me closure. It was just a silent, chilling confirmation that it was all real. That my brother's last moments were spent wrapped in that coat, in the arms of a man who didn't exist, waiting for a monster that did.